that we share throughout the Commonwealth family. Mr. Speaker, one outcome I look forward to with great anticipation is the emergence of a robust ethos of strong individual and collective parliamentary performance, is cognizant that Parliament, the national executive, and the judiciary are ultimately arms of one government. Let me repeat that. One outcome that I look forward to with great anticipation is the emergence of a robust ethos of strong individual and collective parliamentary performance that is cognizant that Parliament, the national executive, and the judiciary are ultimately arms of one government. It is essential that we make significant progress in building a constructive synergy among the arms of government, which scrupulously observes constitutional boundaries, checks, and balances. At the same time, we must be capable of coordinating effectively towards the realization of our shared aspiration, the well-being of every citizen and their socio-economic uplift through a radical transformation governance and in our economy. In order to achieve effective synergy between the arms of government, I have assigned the Prime Cabinet Secretary, the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, the role of coordinating and liaising with Parliament on the legislative agenda of government. And I have done so realizing the importance of there being a firm, definite link between the executive and Parliament that facilitates the work of Parliament, especially on requests from the executive. I have also assigned the Honorable Attorney General, Honorable Justin Muturi, the counterpart liaison role with the judiciary. I hope, dear honorable members, that you see, as I do, a collaborative framework along these lines is a viable means of deploying our leadership capabilities to address the issues that matter to Kenyans. It is in this spirit of effective coordination and constructive synergy that I wish to address the matter of dispute management. We are a proudly diverse but inclusive democracy. Parliament represents every shade of opinion in Kenya. Differences, disagreements, and divergent standpoints are inevitable. Something would be terribly wrong if we agreed all the time on everything. How we handle disagreement goes a long way to demonstrate our grasp of the parliamentary mandate. The name parliament originates from an old French word for speaking. Parliament is the national forum where the people, through their representatives, reason together on a continuous basis. Speaking with each other is the essence of the institution. Through debate, consultation, and negotiation over every matter until an acceptable position is reached. Parliament is not a place for picketing or heckling or holding demonstrations or holding other institutions at ransom. I must respectfully observe that the emerging practice of litigating disagreements through the courts not only contradicts the essential purpose of parliamentary institutions, it demonstrates the failure of Parliament at the level of institution and at the member level. The people elected members of the National Assembly to perform their work through Parliament, not the judiciary. If the people had wanted their representatives to litigate their matters in the courts, the Constitution would have provided for the elections of magistrates or judges, not parliamentarians. What I'm trying to say is the following, that there will always be issues, and I want to encourage the leadership of Parliament and the collective body of members of Parliament, both in the National Assembly and in the Senate, that we cannot continue to take our disagreements to the judiciary. If anything, we are surrendering the legitimacy of the houses to the judiciary. And the only beneficiaries of these litigations are those people the Speaker was talking about. The vexatious litigants are the only beneficiaries, and of course, the good people. I do not want to run into trouble with lawyers, but they are the only other beneficiaries of those litigations. So I would really encourage Parliament, if Parliament actually has the power to constitute itself into a court, how does one court take another court to court? You know, it really must be something that Parliament must really think about. And members from across the divide should be able to provide leadership in a manner that we can be able to create consensus on issues that affect the Houses of Parliament. It is time for the leadership of Parliament in both houses and at the majority and minority parties to take a clear stand on this matter and decisively move to discourage the prosecution of parliamentary business in courts. There are some courses of action which automatically fall off our set of strategic options once we properly internalize our purpose, role, and function. For parliamentarians, court litigation is such a course of action. Let us resolve our issues within Parliament. As earlier observed, the National Assembly is essential to the proper functioning of government and the achievements of development aspirations. It holds immense power with fundamental implications over every dimension of national endeavor. This power, however, must be exercised with prudence, restraint, and a strong sense of sustainability, especially as pertains as budgeting. I agree entirely that we must cut the cloth that fits us. We cannot continuously have an oversized budget and imagine that there will be some miracles that will happen. When I came into office, we had a budget that we needed to borrow 900 billion. And I thought that was reckless and irresponsible. I cut it down to 600 billion. I will be presenting shortly our revised budget that will actualize that commitment that I made to the country. The context of national budgetary decision-making, balancing limited resources against the demanding needs for equitable allocation and avoidable obligations, makes hard and unpopular decisions inevitable. The scope of our budgetary ambitions is firmly dictated by our ability to finance it through available revenue-raising measures. Service delivery depends on appropriation of available resources, and it is quite clear that not every item we deem urgent and necessary will be financed. And when I say available revenue-raising measures, I mean that each and every one of us, once we agree on a tax regime, each and every one of us must pay their part of taxes. We cannot continue to operate in a space where those in power exempt themselves from paying taxes using all manner of instruments, while those who do not have as much power pay tax. All I am saying is that the good people who are used to exempting themselves from paying tax, their day is up. Every citizen must pay tax. That's all I'm saying. And it doesn't matter, even if they sponsor demonstrations so that they don't pay tax, I want to promise them they will pay tax. There's no more exemption. This country is not the animal farm, where some are more equal than others. We are going to have a society where every citizen carries a fair share of our burden to raise taxes. I am not talking about additional taxes. I am talking about taxes that have been agreed upon by Parliament and signed into law. We must therefore be especially prudent, by which I mean that it is our duty to avoid increase in budgetary allocations regardless of financing capacity, and to endeavor at all times to use our offices as servants of the people to ensure that government lives within its means. And that is a collective responsibility, both by the executive and by the legislature, that we ensure that our budget-making process is aligned to the resources that we have. This calls for us to bring back our expenditures within sustainable limits. Our recurrent expenditure currently outstrips revenue collection. You will recall that in our last interaction, I directed the National Treasury to reduce budgetary allocation, as I said, in this year's budget by about 300 billion. The reductions are going to be included in the supplementary budget for your consideration once the House resumes, and I am counting on your understanding and leadership to minimize non-essential expenditure. As pertains the NGCDF, you don't need to convince me about the importance of decentralized funds in meeting the everyday needs of ordinary citizens at the grassroots. I was a member of parliament when there was no CDF. I was a member of parliament when we introduced CDF. I know the difference. It is like day and night. I understand the pressure that you are under in regard to this matter, and I am also aware that the National Treasury has communicated its commitment to a disbursement schedule that is realistically aligned to revenue projections and actual collections. I therefore ask you to be understanding and to work with what is actually possible. And I will be as candid as I can be so that we don't overpromise and we don't underdeliver. I reiterate that we must take a stand and play our part in enhancing budgetary sustainability and minimize fiscal risks by aligning our demands with the best budgeting principles within the limits of our budget policy. Due to the prevailing drought, our people are undergoing food stress. We are taking measures to alleviate the situation by distributing basic food supplies to the most vulnerable in affected populations. It is our plan to support our farmers through provision of adequate farm inputs, including affordable fertilizer, mechanization, technical and extension services, as a key priority. And let me say, it is true, we have a serious situation of cost of living. We didn't get here overnight. We got here because of a series of decisions that were not made in the right direction. We will not get out of it by magic. We will get out of it by clear plans, interventions. And I want to promise you, members, that we have already registered 5 million farmers across the country we intend to work with our farmers to grow our food so that we do not become slaves of imports from other countries when we have farmers who can do this for us. All the farmers are asking is to work with government to ensure that they can produce food for our nation. I know that the National Assembly has and will continue to receive reports detailing the manner and extent of environmental harm occasioned in various parts of the country through various reckless and illegal acts. Deforestation and pollution are among the leading practices. I recently launched a national tree planting program aimed at growing at least 15 billion trees by the year 2032. I urge you to join the movement to green Kenya by leading tree planting campaigns in your constituencies. Additionally, I encourage you to be mindful of the imperative to prioritize the conservation of wetlands and inland water bodies, including rivers and swamps, which are critical for our water needs. I have been greatly encouraged to note your strong participation in regional and Pan-African forums. This is an aspect of your activity that deserves greater focus as an integral part of your functions. The starting point is to arrive at an understanding and articulation of the East African community and other regional frameworks as platforms for us to enrich our sovereignty by projecting our national values and embracing our brothers and sisters throughout our region and continent into networks of collaboration and cooperation for mutual benefit. It is your various interparliamentary encounters, therefore, that will make our values visible as an integral part of our national brand and extend our networks of solidarity and goodwill across our region. As I conclude, I wish to reiterate the Government of Kenya's commitment to sustain a high level of effective, impactful, and transformational engagement with Parliament, since this is key to the achievement of our vision for Kenya. To underscore the seriousness of this commitment, I have designated a principal secretary solely responsible for parliamentary affairs under the Prime Cabinet Secretary, a liaison and coordination function. And I'm sure the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi will be speaking to you later. I intend to honor your invitation to forums like this in furtherance of our intention to enhance synergy among arms of government in order to deliver a more and a better Kenya within a short time. And let me commit to this August gathering that we will continue to explore avenues of building synergy between what you do and what the executive is doing. And I have no intention whatsoever to compromise the oversight role or the independence of Parliament. Parliament must always defend its independence and must always act independently as is required by the Constitution, as we do in the executive and as we do and as the judiciary does, all understanding that we serve the same people, but we have to do so from different platforms. It is now my pleasant duty, honorable members, to declare this seminar officially open. I wish you very fruitful deliberations. May the good Lord bless you. Asanteni sana.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. President, for that very inspiring speech. A round of applause for Mr. President. And allow me, members, briefly, going forward for the rest of the afternoon, the program will be as follows. As soon as we finish singing the national anthem now, we shall remain in the room and allow His Excellency the President to be escorted out of here by the Right Honorable Speaker, together with the select 9 members that the Speaker had mentioned earlier. Thereafter, we shall all leave and move to the dining room and be seated, and then the President shall join us for lunch shortly thereafter. And after our lunch, honorable members, we shall resume at 3 p.m. and the first topic shall be led by the Right Honorable Prime CS, Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, which will start at 3 p.m. on time. Thank you, honorable members. We may now have the national anthem. Let's remain standing for the national anthem. Yes. Ngoje kwanza. Wacha waende.
Wycliffe Musalia Mudavadi on the role of the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, which the President talked to at length this morning. Thereafter, we will go back to the program. When the Minister finishes his presentation, as we have been doing, we'll give an opportunity for those of you with comments, questions to raise. He will then answer them the best he can. And when he finishes, we release him to go because he has a cabinet meeting tomorrow. After that, we'll go back to the morning presentation. I think the questions that many of you asked were not all addressed. So the discussants of the morning will be still available. After that, we have my good friend Wachira Maina. Is he here? Wachira Maina, good lawyer. We have Farah Maalim is in the afternoon session. We have Natalie Foster. That is topic 4. We must push very hard to recover lost time. And after the Wachira Maina group, we have my own distinguished classmate, Justice Ibrahim of the Supreme Court representing Chief Justice Martha Koome. He will be appearing in topic 5 with Kevin Andrews and Sylvia Lucas. That will close the day. So we will take the Prime Cabinet. After that, questions we finish, we go back to those we didn't deal with, and then the next 2 sessions. If we run into time pressure, then we might take topic 4 and 5 together before you ask your questions and make your comments. Let's see how it goes. Let me take also the opportunity to welcome the PS in the Cabinet Secretary's office. Could you stand and be acknowledged? That is the PS in the Prime Cabinet Secretary's office that will be dealing with you on a day-to-day basis. So can we put our hands together to welcome the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi? Pardon? She's called Rono, Miss Rono, Aurelia Rono. I can assure you she's a very enthusiastic PS. She visited me last week and spent 2 hours with me asking me, this is a new office, how do we relate with the Parliament, what are the areas we need to deal with, and I could see somebody who is ready and willing to work with us. So let's give her a round of applause as well. I'm sure she'll be a phone call away anytime you need her. And Musalia Mudavadi is no stranger to you. He has been in Parliament for a long time. He came into Parliament when he was very young, in his late 20s. Is that so? Yes, in his late 20s. He has scaled the heights of leadership in this country. He was Minister for Supplies and Marketing when he was below 30. He became Minister for Finance. He became Minister for Transport and Communications as it was then. He served as Minister for Agriculture. He served as a Vice President. It matters not. Then eventually he served as the Deputy Prime Minister in the Nusumukata government. And now he is our Prime Cabinet Secretary. Welcome, the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me also just say at the very outset, congratulations to all of you for being elected and also for being acknowledged by your respective parties and nominated to Parliament. Pongezi sana, and it may sound a little late, but Happy New Year to all of you. Asante sana. I will be quite brief to try and assist the Speaker in gaining on the time that he said we should try and help on. So I have a presentation which I'll make. I'll try and do it in about 15 minutes or so. But I've had the privilege of sharing it on soft copy with your secretariat here, so that at a later stage you can have time to interrogate it. And we'd be very happy to get your feedback after you've had that opportunity to interrogate it. Basically, when I was invited by the Speaker, I tried to figure out how to explain the linkage between Parliament and the Executive. And I thought I would be a little bit provocative. So I have titled my comments as Some Inconvenient Truths and Going Beyond Business as Usual. We have to start coming to terms with some of the new realities and to see how to operate. So, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Moses Masika Wetangula, the Assembly leadership, honorable members, and the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, Honorable Stephen Twigg. Mr. Speaker, this seminar has asked me to speak to the linkage between Parliament and the Executive. Ordinarily, this topic inadvertently invites me to first explain the role of the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, and second, its linkage to Parliament. The convenient thing to do would be just to draw your attention to Executive Order Number 1 of January 2023, which outlines the functional roles of this office. And these are coordination and supervision of government ministries and state departments, overseeing the implementation of the national government policies, programs, and projects, chairing and coordinating national government legislative agenda across all ministries and state departments in consultation with and for transmission to the party coalition leaders in Parliament. I'll also be chairing the Principal Secretaries Committees and engage in the supervising and technical monitoring and evaluation of government policies and programs. I would then easily tabulate how these functions intersect with the roles of Parliament in legislating, representation, allocation of national revenue, and oversight roles that gel with executive roles of originating bills and implementation of legislation, policy formulation, and service delivery. However, to do justice at this important seminar, I have recently learned through a fresh happening in this forum and, and my own earthquake phenomena experience that sometimes you need to be destructive in order to construct. That change comes only after discomfort. I have therefore deliberately tweaked the title of my presentation, as I said, to read linkage between Parliament and the Executive, some inconvenient truths going beyond business as usual. Let me touch on some of the inconvenient truths. The Constitution is 12 years old. But how often, as leaders, have we or do we reflect on Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity? Specifically, the following articles. Article 73, responsibilities of leadership. 74, the oath of office of state officers. 75, conduct of state officers. 76, probity of state officers. 77, restriction on activities of state officers. 78, citizenship and leadership. 79, legislation to establish the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. 80, legislation on leadership. Further, how about Article 10 and its 17 national values? The obligations on representation of the people in Chapter 7, the fidelity of Chapter 12 on public finance, Chapter 13 guidelines on public finance management, and the subsequent laws that operationalize these chapters of the Constitution. If I dare ask, how many of us can recite 2 national values? The inconvenient truth is that these chapters and the articles in the Constitution on leadership activities are adhered to in default rather than in observance. Could it be that they escape our attention because they are inconvenient to our well-being? Let's take the following issues, for example. Corruption. It is no secret that corruption has been a persistent problem in our country. As leaders, we must be prepared to face it head-on. The second one is lack of political will. Often, we take political will to mean risk. In policy implementation, we hesitate to take bold decisions in the best interests of citizens, out of fear of the unknown or simply because a policy does not align with personal or political interests. The other thing is lack of transparency. Lack of political will is a cousin of lack of transparency in public processes. And lack of transparency has an uncle in corruption. When processes are opaque and not easily accessible to the public, citizens suspect incestuous relationships and cannot trust or even hold leaders accountable. Let me also touch on political polarization. Political polarization is very detrimental to decision-making in resource allocation. Consensus in policy making and legislation is the casualty of political polarization in favor of inertia and myopia. Hence, in a highly polarized political landscape with different ethnic and regional leadership, often taking opposing positions on mundane issues, and decision-making slows, and the scales are tilted unfavorably against national development. Let us also look at briefly the issue of inadequate policy coordination. Inadequate policy coordination is a twin to lack of skills and expertise, capacity in policy initiation and implementation. In such an environment, coordinated outputs are difficult to some public officials. Thus, government ministries, agencies, and departments work in silos, leading to duplication, turf wars, and inefficiency. This is when the death of effective policy initiatives, implementation, evaluation, and monitoring occurs. Lethargy then occupies public offices rather than skilled officers, and blame games are formalized as government communication. So, how does the office of the Prime Minister sit in this background that I've put across? The coordination and supervision of government ministries, state departments, and agencies' role is not only just meant to ensure effective whole government and open government and effective delivery of services, but also inbuilt with its fulfillment of the commitment to enhance parliamentary oversight of the executive for increased public accountability. In this role, the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary has direct and indirect links to Parliament through the twin function of chairing and coordinating national government legislative agenda across all ministries and state departments, and chairing the principal secretaries' committees. This means dealing with matters and functions relating to Parliament as the liaison office between the executive and Parliament, identifying policy, legal, and institutional reforms needed to implement the government agenda, oversight to ensure public participation and the involvement of other stakeholders in the development of bills by the various ministries, departments, and agencies. And honorable members, the issue of public participation has cost a lot of legislation. That is usually the Waterloo. We also have to monitor and evaluate the progress of policies and legislation to ensure the objects of the national government intended in the legal framework are within the constitutional framework and achieved in time. To illustrate the interplay between the executive and Parliament, it is worth noting that some parliamentary resolutions need interventions by the executive to be actualized. When Parliament sends resolutions to the respective ministries and departments and agencies for action, the tracking of and response time to these resolutions must be enhanced by the establishment of the Prime Cabinet Secretary's Office. In addition, bills passed by Parliament that have tremendous impact on priorities of national and county government's agenda will get priority watch. It is therefore important to centrally identify such actionable bills, track them, and ensure timely implementation. A fully fledged State Department for Parliamentary Affairs has been created for this purpose, and I'm happy that the Speaker has introduced the Permanent Secretary here, the Principal Secretary. And this department is tasked with communication of policy directions to Parliament, development and implementation of a framework to track and monitor bills for legislation in Parliament, ensure quality research and analysis to advise on existing legislative gaps, and ensure action and response to instructions and requests from Parliament. Complementing that department is the State Department of Performance and Delivery Management, which will deal with matters of performance contracting and delivery of public services within the executive, as well as oversight the implementation of national government policies, programs, and projects. This is why, and it's important for Parliament to note this, is that the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary hosts oversight agencies that include the Government Delivery Services. This was previously the PDU, the State Corporations Advisory Committee, the Inspectorate of State Corporations, and the Performance Contracting and Monitoring Unit. These are agencies that will be available for us to work with you. Now, in order to appreciate how the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary can help to improve execution of House resolutions, we have done a review of the status of the implementation of the House resolutions from the 12th Parliament. And this is what we found. The 12th Parliament sent 247 items for action by various ministries, departments, and government agencies. To date, items marked as not done are a monstrous 135. That is 54.7%. And out of this, 65% of the 135 items were first tabled in Parliament more than 3 years ago. Ongoing items are 34%, which translates to 34, which translates only to 13.8%. And those done are 78, and it translates to 31.5%. This, on average, is a completion rate of only 31.5% for resolutions spanning more than 5 years since tabling, and therefore one can see clearly that there's a very low implementation rate of parliamentary resolutions. In the matter of fast-tracking Parliament resolutions, we will intervene in the following manner. We will incorporate a resolutions tracker into its overall tracking tool dashboard to ensure, that is the office's tool, to ensure that the visibility of resolutions is maintained until action is completed. We will be requesting Parliament to also copy our office any communication they make with the various ministries, departments, and agencies, so that we can also assist in the follow-up. We will want to carry out regular consultations with the House in matters that need prioritization and fast-tracking. We will also, through the Principal Secretaries Committee, provide a platform to resolve multi-sector stakeholder or multi-stakeholder complex issues, because As I said, sometimes people work in silos, so this office will provide an opportunity for us to collate all these issues and deal with them as we should. Detailed proposal for the implementation framework, mechanisms and strategies to improve the engagement between the executive and parliament are in a soft copy, as I indicated to you, and we have handed them over. They'll be attached to these remarks that I'm making. In the meantime, to make the executive and parliament liaison process more productive, I would request that Parliament could review its communication processes to rope us in. Parliament should constantly update our office on its committees and House calendars with the aim of us assisting and making sure that scheduling and reporting and presentation dates by various ministries is handled effectively. This, ladies and gentlemen, if we work together with all the stakeholders, I think we can serve the Kenyan people better with the leverage of Parliament to guide us. Allow me just to highlight one or two executive expectations that we need from Parliament. First, I'll flag the privatization bill, 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, privatization has stalled. It has stalled. It's not moving at all. And earlier when I was listening to the conversation in this building, in this house, there was the issue of where does the government look for resources? And it was clear that nobody wants to hear about any new taxation. Ladies and gentlemen, one way of the government raising resources to undertake certain programs is through privatization of various state entities. So I'll be appealing to Parliament that since the Privatization Commission and Treasury have finalized the draft bill and submitted it for public participation, we'll be looking forward to the Assembly or Parliament to help us so that we can fast track this kind of bill. The other thing that I would just want to talk on is more of something that I feel strongly about, and I'll sum it up in 3 words. This is the matter of growth, equity, and sustainability. Growth, equity, and sustainability. In short, GES, or you can just have it as GES. Now, these are basic principles, and I would like us to just reflect on when we push legislation, whether it is a private member-sponsored legislation, or it's even within the government, or it's a petition emanating from a petition of a citizen, and it's going to be translated into law, we need to ask ourselves, does that law have provisions that can lead to growth in our economy? Does that law have the principle of equity? Is there common good across the board? And is that law and what it seeks to achieve, is it sustainable? If a piece of legislation does not reflect the principle of growth, does not reflect the principle of equity, and does not appear to be sustainable, then is it really worth being translated into legislation? These are the fundamental questions that we really need to ask ourselves. So whether we are looking at taxation, policies that would reduce income inequality, fund programs, then we must judge that piece of legislation based on those 3 principles. If it is something that is going to address climate change, investment in renewable energy, to help sustain sustainability in that area, the negative impacts of climate change, then we must ourselves, if the principles are there, then it seems to be sound legislation. Does it uplift the small and medium-sized enterprises? We want equity. Are we seeing legislation that brings out growth, equity, and sustainability? Are we bringing in legislation that will anchor housing, healthcare, childcare, to ensure that everybody is able to earn a decent living and to pay for their health? Is that legislation available? Ask yourself as a rule of thumb, when you bring your piece of legislation, does it cover that? And I'll give an example of some extreme pieces of legislation that have been there in the past. They can sometimes look very popular, but they can be very devastating. Let me give the example of the Donde Bill. The Donde Bill, which was a buzzword in the country for some time, was a bill that sought to try and reintroduce price controls in the system, but starting with interest rates. So it looked very popular. Everybody would like to pay a loan, but at a modest interest rate, including me. But at the end of the day, it was a piece of legislation that disrupted the entire economic fabric, and it actually caused a curtailment of foreign direct investment and even foreign assistance to the government of Kenya until Parliament, I think it should be was it the 11th Parliament? After reflection and after the ping pong, you reversed it and put an end to that particular piece of legislation. So we need to look at it and say, when I'm bringing up that piece of legislation, what is going to be the overall impact, not to me as an individual, but to the entire country. Another awkward piece of legislation was the legislation that made Kenya a one-party state. You remember that bill that dealt with section... Yeah, 2A. You remember that piece of legislation, you know? Again, it sounded popular. It was rushed, you know, and we pushed it, but, you know, as a nation. And the consequences were severe because it was a serious aggression on democracy and constitutionalism, and it was so damaging that, again, the international community walked out on Kenya until that piece of legislation was repealed 10 years later. So you count the number of years lost when people are haggling over that, the impact on the country's reputation, on the country's ability to harness direct investment and so forth. So, ladies and gentlemen, I was just trying to highlight some of these things. Not that you don't know, I know you know about it. You think about it every other time. After all, you're the one sitting in the hot seat in this context. But it is sometimes not too bad for us to remind ourselves that at times, broad consultation and the public participation envisaged in the Constitution will be very, very helpful. So, the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary is there, and as I think it was the Speaker and somebody who brought it out, I offer myself to you on this one as somebody who is a politician. I've also been a member of Parliament, I've been a minister, I've been a political party leader, I have been a presidential aspirant, I've been the shortest serving vice president. But all this wealth of experience, I think if we partner with you, if we work with you, we can help in getting very critical legislation that is beneficial to the people of Kenya out of the way. And we can also make it useful. So I come back to my 3 principles: growth, equity, sustainability. As you reflect, as you debate here, if you can persuade the nation that there is growth in your legislation, there is equity in your legislation, and it is sustainable, then I am sure we'll be on the right track and we'll be able to change things for the better in this country. So ladies and gentlemen, I think I'll end there. I hope I've helped in minimizing the loss of time, but I wish you success in your deliberations, and I hope we can engage further and see how we can improve to deliver for the people of Kenya. And please send us your feedback once you get access to this documentation. Asanteni sana, and have a good afternoon.
You've heard the Cabinet Secretary. Any questions, comments? We'll take the first 3. Robert Mbui, Bissau, Shakil Shabir. We can take 4. I'll take 1 from the other end. That is who? Dr. Nyikal. Okay, let's take the first 4. Can you pass the microphone to...
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
If it's a question, you ask 1. If there are comments, you make 1.
I'll be very brief, but since I'm the first one, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Prime Cabinet Secretary. In your discussions, I've not heard you mention the committee of the House that deals with implementation of motions and resolutions of the House, which is a committee of implementation. That I just wanted to mention that it's important that you link with them. But I have only one issue, Speaker. I'm a member of the Committee of Delegated Legislation. One of the biggest challenges we are facing as Parliament is when the government or the executive implements or makes laws and operates them and operationalizes them without seeking leave of the House, without coming back to the House to request for permission. Because in every law that we make, we always allow some part for delegated legislation or subsidiary legislation. Now, because we are still on recess and we are about to go back, I want to bring to your attention that the Ministry of Education has been one of the biggest culprits of that behavior, that they keep implementing decisions without the House. And right now, as we are speaking, the new system of education, the CBC system, the children of this country under the junior secondary school, suddenly, just after the elections, we made a decision to put them in primary schools. Now, what is happening, Prime Cabinet Secretary, is that the children who are supposed to be... Okay. Thank you, Speaker, because I think this one is something I wanted him to take note so that he can maybe take action. What has happened, Prime Cabinet Secretary, is that they have collapsed our schools, our primary schools, so that not every primary school is a center for JSS, which means that the children that were in some of the schools are being forced to go to other institutions. Now, I don't know how you're going to handle that because it's really urgent, and it's one of the things that already parents are up in arms all over the country. That is one of the issues I think you need to address quickly so that we can be sure that our children will go to the right schools and this problem can be resolved. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Your Excellency, Chief Cabinet Secretary, mine is on equity. You mentioned about Parliament ensuring that there is equity. But looking at your very central role in government, do you have mechanisms in place to ensure that there's fair distribution of resources so that one corner of this country is not sort of overdeveloped and leaving others behind? An example, as your office taken stock on the development, past development, current development, just to realize that there are other places that have not realized the developments we are talking about. Simple example, infrastructure. So I think basically on equity, we'll need to see, or we'll need to understand how your office will be driving that process so that to ensure fair distribution on resources across the Republic. Thank you.
Thank you. Shakil Shabir.
Yes. Honorable Prime Cabinet Secretary, thank you very much for this, for the opening up your views. The concern that I have, I am very pleased to see that the bridge is being formed. It is the person behind the proposal that makes the difference, and I'm quite enthusiastic that bridge that you're forming between the executive and legislature is going to be one which is going to be fruitful to us both. I hasten to add that we don't want it to become, we don't want Parliament to be captured by the executive. You know, Honorable Mudavadi sir, I've known you for a very long time. You're following an example of what we really did not want. The Chief Cabinet Secretary approach, where we were being ordered in Parliament, literally, and of what So I think that is a role that we have to play. I chaired APNAC, the African Parliamentarians Against Corruption, and I'll be seeking to working with you as part of Parliament to develop our initiative further. So I'm very enthusiastic about what's going to happen. Knowing you and knowing the way you behave, the way you conduct yourself, I think we will do far. But let us not make that mistake of the executive capture of Parliament. Thank you.
Dr. Nikal.
Thank you, Prime Cabinet Secretary, for educating us on what the role of the office is. But two comments, actually two questions, one comment that makes a matter of detail. You say it is coordinating legislative agenda across government before it goes to Parliament. How then does it link with the Office of the Attorney General? Number two is also chairing the committee of permanent or principal secretaries. Again, if that is the case, how does it link with the office of the Secretary of the Cabinet and the head of civil service? And lastly, the issue of gas growth, equity, and sustainability, where we find we pass laws that actually later on found actually not to be actually destructive. Does that just not mean that we, as parliamentarians, when we're discussing these laws or these bills, particularly at the committee stage, do not actually consider them seriously? If that has to go back to the executive to make sure that the laws, before they come to us, are that effective or not destructive, then what does it say about our work as members of Parliament? Thank you.
Prime Cabinet, you can take those for now.
Thank you. Some are comments and some are points of emphasis. I think I want to say that the issue of the delegated legislation is critical. And maybe the lawyers in the House can also advise us here. But talking to the Attorney General, his opinion or advice is that Normally, delegated legislation would lapse after a 10-year period. Yes. And it would require a review and further consultations. So the window that can be there is, I think, a slight extension to be able to allow the relevant departments to take into account current circumstances and liaise with Parliament so that that can be dealt with in a proper way. And this is one of the reasons we are here, so that we can start engaging more fairly and legally on some of these issues. I think I will take up the issue of the Ministry of Education with the Cabinet Secretary for Education, because you raise a very fundamental point. Let me say that I'll look at it, talk to him, and we can respond to you on that one. The issue of equity from Honorable Bissau. It is through collaboration and proper interrogation of bills or pieces of legislation or even policies that we can decipher whether there is a fair proportion of the principle of equity reflected there. And I do agree with you, and that is why I brought it here, that can we just revisit those three principles: growth, equity, and sustainability. We need to ask ourselves as Parliament, the bills that we have passed and the ones that we intend to pass, do we reflect equity? Do those bills reflect the balance and the proper accommodation of all parts of the country? Or have we been pushing bills that are detrimental to some other parts or to some segments of our society? And this is why I'm really emphasizing that let us look for that principle of equity in our legislation. I want to assure Honorable Shakil Shabir that if the state tried to capture Parliament, it would be a lost cause. We should not go there. We should not even think about it. Parliament must be independent. And this morning, the comments that came from the speakers, it's very clear that they're very strong men and women who will not entertain anything of that nature. So, so we shall not even attempt to walk in that direction. Let me add that we look forward to cooperating meaningfully where we have that piece of legislation, where we need something urgent. For instance, if I asked you today, that piece of legislation you're putting on the table, is it in a position to increase an extra shilling in the pocket of a Kenyan? Or is it just a piece of legislation that is going to grind so many institutions to a halt? That should be the guiding principle. And I also agree with Nikal that we need to take our legislative processes even more seriously, and those in the executive, we need to be clearer on what kind of policies we are actually putting on the table. The reality is that we have seen a lot of legislation that is not backed by policy, emanating both from the executive at times and also even within Parliament. We are all guilty on this one, that sometimes we are pushing through a piece of legislation and we've not thought through the policy that we want to try and achieve. So I think this is something that we can all work together and be able to deal with. Mr. Nikal, Honorable, I think the fact that we will be able to get government working more cohesively on cross-cutting issues, I think is very important. Principal secretaries are usually the pivot point when it comes to policy formulation and even the implementation. in the various ministries, and a forum or a platform that allows proper integration on those issues and canvassing and conversations would be very, very helpful. For the issue of the Office of the Attorney General, in the committee that we are setting up, because the structure we are setting up is such that we can work not in silos but with others, and we'll work very closely with the Office of the Attorney General. The Office of the Attorney General is our principal drafter. They are the key, at the end of the day, any piece of legislation will pass through their hands. What we want to try and do is to fill a gap that relates more to the policy formulation and the internal consultations that needs to be undertaken before the Office of Attorney General does its final drafting. That is, it may appear thin, but it's an area that we've noticed that it becomes quite a challenge. Sometimes if you just push a bill to the Attorney General and you have not thought through it, it becomes a problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Prime. I think just for emphasis, the point of Robert Mbui, before we take another round, just 1 minute. We have a lot of regulations out there drafted by people in parastatals, even in cooperative societies, in ministries, and in other government agencies. The exclusive authority to make law under our Constitution is vested in Parliament. At the national level, National Assembly and Senate, and the county assemblies. Courts always make laws through judicial pronouncements that become precedents that we follow. I think Robert Mbui was also driving towards the point that, are you now able as a new office to communicate to all government agencies, including ministries, that under no circumstances should they sit and make regulations and impose them on wananchi, some with even financial obligations, without taking them to Parliament? For Parliament to look at, we have committees of delegated legislation that will then formulate them into law. I think, Robert, that is one of the points you're driving. Is that correct? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are well guided.
Yes.
Yeah. Madam is taking note.
Okay. So now we can take another 4. Looks like the Prime Cabinet will stay here for a little longer than we thought. I'll take the gentleman at the end. Who is that, Mheshimiwa? Kwenya. I'll take Bensouda. I'll take Rindikiri. And I'll take Mama Nairobi, and I'll take Raso. Those are 5. We'll do another round after that. And the next round will be the last. Okay, start from where we started. 1 question or 1 comment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Cabinet Secretary, and is on an issue that you've just raised on the issue of regulations. I understand that Treasury is preparing some amendment to the Constitution, or to the Act on privatization, so that then parastatals, when the government is intending to sell its stake in government-owned parastatals, that then Parliament is going to be overpassed or bypassed. And there's a proposal to that effect, that we change the law, and of course that is going to remove our oversight task that we have been tasked by the Constitution. So I would want to hear your comment on the same, because I think it will be in bad taste to bypass Parliament when the government is intending to do intending to sell its take to the public.
Who was the next? Bensouda?
For the presentation, I would like to ask from the monitoring perspective. I'm glad that you've mentioned that in your cabinet secretary, you're going to ensure that monitoring unit is set. Number one, what are the strategic objective approaches that you are going to use or employ to ensure that the issues which are touching on policy do not have stalemate, because you are the link between the parliament and executive? And should they arise, what feedback mechanisms are you going to employ to ensure that they are amicably realized in a structured manner? Number two is on gas. We are talking of raising the economic situations, which you said increasing of tax is not the only way. We can also go privatization. Yes, we know there are many industries in this country which have fallen. I would like to ask, what is the role of the government in ensuring that all the industries that are to be initiated, those that are existing and collapse, are not going to be fully privatized, and how is that going to be used to benefit the economic status of this country and curb on the wage bill? Thank you.
Who's next? Rindikiri.
Thank you. Our Prime Cabinet Secretary, I lays on an issue that we all have suffered under. There are so many commissions in this country. There are Commission Salary Elimination Commission, there are Commission on Revenue Allocation, TSC, Commission on Cohesion. These are all commissions that are touching to the welfare either of the employees of this country or even the teachers of this country. Mr. Prime Cabinet Secretary, in your speech you did not mention your coordination with these commissions. Which office will they be coordinated from? Because as it is right now, they are doing a lot of activities out there, independent of Parliament, and the questions are left to us as members of Parliament to answer. For example, the TSC, which is operating on funny platform right now, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. We need to know how your office is going to coordinate with all these institutions, so that they are responsible and they are able to deliver, particularly when it touches to Parliament. The other specific commission, Commission on Revenue Allocation, which plays a very greater role in commission allocation and specifically determining which region need to benefit from arid and semi-arid land programs. We have never known how they operate. We hear some regions have been defined, others are not defined, and we get to know this when they have already implemented their programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Pasaris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Cabinet Secretary, when I was listening to you, I want to make a comment on a legislation that I found. In 2014, the Parliament passed a law, they passed a bill on the psychology and counseling. And when we came to COVID and we realized that mental health was a big issue, and I came to find out about this bill through some counselors out there in Nairobi, that there is this bill and it has never been implemented, and if it could be implemented right now, it could really help us deal with mental health. So I got a copy of the bill, I wrote to the Ministry of Health, and I said, look, there's this bill, can you implement it? And they said, no, we do not have a budget. So later on, towards the end, the CS then, Mutahi Kagwe, appointed a board. But for me, I feel that if you want to have growth, equity, and sustainability, we have to take a bill, not just to policy, but also to budgeting for it, so that you can actually be able to implement it. Because can you imagine how many Kenyans are suffering right now with mental health challenges, and we've not put resources into the Psychology and Counselors Act, and it took us more than 5 years to even think about how can we implement that act. There's so many things that happen in that area where we also put investments, like we had a hospital that had stalled for over 30 years, and this was when I went to the then budget committee chair, Ichungwa, and I said, look, there's this hospital, can you find me at least 500 million to complete it in Nairobi that has been stalled for over 30 years, even before Mama Lucy it was started. And then he found the resources and eventually it was built, but the Ministry of Health did not know about it, Nairobi County did not know about it, it was a project of the Public Works then. So I feel that your role, your office, if it's going to look at legislation, it has to go beyond so that we can also find the laws that exist, because there's some really good laws that have been passed, but they're just sitting. They've not been implemented, there's no budget. So I wonder whether your office will also play a role in making sure that that happens. Thank you.
Russell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Prime Cabinet Secretary, my question is about public participation. Every time the law is passed, it becomes an act, then it is being challenged in court. The question I want to put to you, because you will be majorly organizing the heart of government in terms of crafting these laws, the shape and form that public participation is likely to take. Secondly is, in the tail end of all parliaments, bills are rushed, they become law. Then the next parliament, when it comes to being, it challenges those laws, and people on the street say, those bad laws were passed by parliament. How are we going to avoid to pass laws at the dead end of the night only to be challenged in court? Finally is the omnibus bill. I think for the old members, what government attempts to do, if you want to pass bad laws, you snake things in the omnibus. How are you going to assure us that actually, instead of omnibus, we can actually even pass laws or bills that are 2 or 3 liners that address a single issue? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Prime. You can now go.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize the first aspect of Kwenya, that what the Treasury has done, they are putting out the bill for public participation, and it cannot become law until Parliament has dealt with it. So whatever
the same issue also comes to the Bensouda question on privatization. That perhaps is a topic that I would request that Parliament maybe gives it a special day sometime, because there's usually the debate around privatization as to what is a strategic enterprise, what is not a strategic enterprise, and in the process we have categorized these that way, but some of them are just loss-making entities, and we are sustaining people there, just paying salaries, and at the end of the day they're not doing anything. So what I am calling upon is that as Parliament looks at this, and this is a very serious area, for your information, we have over 300 state corporations. Over 300. Some of them, nobody even knows where they are. All right? But legally they are there. People are earning from those entities. Taxpayers, yourself and others are sustaining them. So we need to have a clear situation
under privatization conversation, a detailed one, on what needs to be privatized and what needs to be held on by the government. Secondly, economies change. And as economies change and they become dynamic, what was perceived as strategic turns out not to be strategic in the original sense. And I'll give an example. Telecoms, the whole issue of communication. The first thing that came in was the fax machine. And I remember being a very young person in government, the people who monitor what people do in government offices and elsewhere were even trying to track which office has a fax machine and which one has not. Because they used to say, siri za serikali zinatokea kwa fax machine. Then later the question was, can you privatize telecommunications? And the argument was that this is strategic, it must be in the hands of the government and nobody else. But today, you and I know that communications is strategic, but it is being driven by the private sector. All right? So we have outgrown what was the perception then. And there are so many other examples one can give in that field. So we need to have an engagement where we can then handle this question in more detail. For instance, KPLC is a monopoly, a distribution monopoly. But before, KPLC used to be both a generation and distribution.
Separated. You can have KPLC now generating. You also have people who are doing solar power generation. Others are doing wind. Okay, but the monopoly of distribution is still in the hands of KPLC. And you people have traveled, you have gone to school elsewhere, you have seen what is happening globally. Even distribution of power, whether you're in the US or the UK, it is not a monopoly anymore. It is in the hands of other players. So it is up to Parliament to say, is this law serving us anymore or is it and what do we do? And these are the tough questions that we will all have to deal with. I hope I have assisted a little bit in that area, but it's too complex to finish in one sitting. I would really encourage, Mr. Speaker, at some stage, a thorough discussion on privatization would be very, very important for Parliament, because at the end of the day, it cannot take place without Parliament giving its support. Mr. Honorable Rindikiri, I just want to say that I'm being very cautious because those are constitutional commissions. Some of them are constitutional commissions and they're independent, and I don't want to try and purport to legislate for some of them. They have to originate their concerns in a manner that is separate from this process. I'm sure even Justice Ibrahim will help us on this one when he's making a conversation. So I didn't want to tread there. But in terms of liaison, constitutional commissions are the liaison with the executive, okay? Where they may need certain things processed. That has been vested with the Deputy President, okay? So that is why I'm not touching that particular issue. Mheshimiwa Pasaris, I cannot agree with you more. This is why I was saying that there are a lot of pieces of legislation that will require tracking so that they can be actualized. We also have to make them become much more thorough in seeing whether they are funded or whether they are not funded. For instance, one of the questions that always comes up at the cabinet level is that when you submit a cabinet memo or you want something approved, you have to state whether there are financial implications or not. If there are financial implications, either to a field or to a particular program, then you must explain how you intend to fund that particular program. So I think it's absolutely essential that what you're saying, can we back our legislation, and if Parliament can also be very clear and interrogate the issue of financing, and that brings in the third aspect of Nigeria's sustainability. Whatever we are putting on the table, is it sustainable financially? Is it sustainable through the budget? Or what are we putting on the table? I also want to touch on Honorable Roso's message. Actually, we need help. We need help because I think working with you, and I thought Parliament had made an attempt, but I don't know. Have made an attempt. Have we really defined how to actualize the requirement in the Constitution of public participation? Have we defined the parameters of stakeholder? I don't know that the relevant committee of Parliament may have done that because frankly speaking, I think collectively we need some legislation that can help deal with this issue of public participation and stakeholder engagement. Let us unbundle it and let us be able to give it some legal framework that can help everybody. So I think we are going by a court ruling or court precedents on this particular issue. That is what is really guiding public participation issues now. But maybe this is the time to actually put it into legislation. Finally, I can only say that it is true that the omnibus bill can sometimes be used for mischief, and let us all work to make sure that that does not happen, because I think there are guidelines from the Speaker and from the standing orders on what should constitute or qualifies to be in an omnibus bill. I think this particular parameter has been overstretched, and sometimes you find that a bill that should literally be a standalone bill is being sneaked into an omnibus bill. And I think that is something that Parliament can deal with through the standing orders and the regulations. Asante.
Thank you. Honourable members, in the interest of time, I think we'll end up here with the Prime Cabinet Secretary. And I'll invite the Deputy Speaker to take the floor for the next topic as I see of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Deputy Speaker, you go to the next topic.
Thank you. Honorable members, I know it's a difficult afternoon after a heavy lunch, so we can just stand up for a minute, stretch, and then sit down. Can stretch a little, and we can wake up. then I join.
Order.
Sit down. 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Okay, hold on, members. You know, this has happened without the permission of the speaker. So can you hold on a little bit? I don't consult the speaker. Give me just 2 minutes. Yeah, because I think it's subordination on my part that the father is pulling. But I know that if Kwashira is okay with it, I need to consult his so kindly just stretch a little as I find out. And then Justice Ibrahim says he just has a so I think I will now let the Honorable Speaker make the decision.
Honorable members, you know we are a democratic house. Is it the mood of the house that we are adjourned tomorrow morning? I will now put the question. The House do not adjourn to tomorrow morning. Will as members of that opinion say aye? Will those of the court of opinion say nay? Now we direct us 8:30. Then 9 sharp, we have the first presenter. Enjoy your evening. There is the speaker's cocktail in this hotel at 7 p.m. All are welcome. In this hotel.
We'll come to that, Chairman.
Yes.
Let's go in sequence. So once the companies were shortlisted for printing the materials, was the evaluation report brought to the commission?
No. That is still part of procurement, and evaluation report is given to the CEO by the director of procurement.
So you are telling me, other than you approving the specifications for the voting materials, you never played a part in any way, You just had the CEO has appointed the Greek company, what was it called, Lycos, to bring the materials.
We know we have the Procurement Act and Public Disposal Act, and